All right, folks, welcome to another podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest, actually a good friend of mine as well. So, this is going to be a fun conversation. Doug and I have known each other for many years, and we've actually worked together on different projects throughout the years, connecting with Israel. I mean, that's his passion. I live here, so it's my passion. And we're both into photography, filmmaking, those areas of basically trying to show the beauty and the wonder of Israel through these mediums that can help basically connect you who don't get to see Israel and you've never gotten to have an experience or be a part of. We bring it to you, to your home. And so Doug has an incredible book table picture book with a ton of information and some of the most beautiful pictures. It's Israel Rising and Jerusalem Rising. And so, just in the title themselves, it is just a cool theme of basically taking photos of the past from the land of Israel, like the earliest you could find of different areas. And we went on a wild goose chase in the old city for one of those projects, and it was just fun and cool to do this historic deep dive with Doug. And I'm telling you, this is the kind of people that I believe are the ones that we need to listen to when it comes to Israel and these issues that you're hearing very frequently lately on, be it Tucker, be it the Sean Ryan show with Megyn Kelly just recently. She called Israel a cancer. Wow, that wasn't anything that she had in her opinion in the past 2+ years ago. If she ever talked about Israel, it was actually quite the opposite. Israel's America's greatest ally, and so on and so forth. And now we're a cancer. She stood up for Israel during post October 7 and the victims and the evil stuff that happened. But now apparently it's the popular thing to throw Israel under the bus and to hate on this small country that is really a miracle. If you put all this junk aside, all these talking points, the clickbait, the what's popular now nonsense, and that's where Doug comes into the picture because he's known Israel for years, and he's not a new guy on the block, so to speak. And Doug, you have this incredible organization called Ezra Adventures. You bring small, quality groups, I guess you could say. It's not a big bus full of tourists, and basically running where Jesus walked, but it's actually experiencing the land in an intimate way, in a very private way. And we've also had some of your groups over for Shabbat dinners and celebrations here at our home, giving them an immersion into Jewish society and customs and people and connections. And that's just one area that Doug has been involved in. But brother, can you tell me what got you into that? Like, what was the thing that got you into that in the first place when you started that?
Talking about the trips or just Israel in general or Ezra Adventures
Israel
or
in general, yeah. What got you into Israel? Like, why Israel of all places?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a Christian family and never heard Israel or Jewish much of anything, but I always just had this pull in my heart of just I was always even as a teenager, if I'm reading through the scriptures, I'm pulled towards like temple service and Jacob and the stories in Genesis and or King David. Like I was just always sort of drawn to Israel, and in fact at that time I'd kind of joked and said to a couple of friends, like, if I find out the family is Jewish at that time, because I didn't know, if I find out the family is Jewish somewhere along the line, like this is going to make a whole lot more sense to me of like why I feel the way that I do. And very unexpectedly, it's probably 12, 14 years ago now, I guess I would say, found some of that. And I was actually, this is sort of an aside, but I was actually talking to my mom about, some of these different things I was finding. And she says to me, she says, well, your great grandparents, meaning, my mom saying, her grandparents, your great grandparents, their names were Israel and Leah. And I said, Mom, like, I don't know how much more, I don't know how much more Jewish you can get than that. So anyhow, as I've been going back through, I realized that there has been some deep Jewish heritage going back to Eastern Europe, back to even like, centuries back. And through the last few hundred years, when some of the family moved from Eastern Europe to the New World in the U.S., there were some name changes, and there were some things to, I think, maybe perhaps to hide some of the identity along the way. But anyhow, long story short, I've been realizing that all of this stuff that was in my heart, was something that perhaps God knew all along. And so when my very first trip, in fact, I write a little bit about this in my photo book, Jerusalem Rising, that's right here behind me. My very first trip to Israel on the Mount of Olives, I had this moment where I saw these white puffy clouds rolling over. It was during the fall feast, during Sukkot, and
Hmm.
and I'm seeing these white puffy clouds roll over the city, and I just had a moment, and I thought, these clouds look a lot like the white puffy clouds that roll over where I live in the States. And I just kind of had this moment where, like, this is no longer a Bible story. This is no longer a faraway place. This is a real place with real people yelling at each other and real horns and real, sort of city chaos. But also realizing, like, there's real promises in the scriptures that haven't yet been fulfilled. There's real things that are happening here, and everything, to kind of say it again, everything just really became real for me. Everything became very vivid, and I knew in that moment that for me, and this is back when this is probably 30 plus years ago. I mean, this is as my early 20s. I knew then, even if it took 10, 15 years to come back, I already felt connected to the land. Now, that was long before photo books, long before tour groups. Like, I had no aspirations of any of those things, having no idea. I mean, in your early 20s, what do you actually know, right? But yeah, it was just something that I couldn't explain. And so that sort of began the journey, and that kind of has, I guess, where a lot of those sort of heart things kind of grew out into what's happening now.
Yeah. I've been on quite a few podcasts lately, and one of them was with Chad Wright, who's a former Navy SEAL, and he's been bombarded as a Christian, because he himself is a Christian, um, uh, about the issue of Israel. And and I mentioned on that podcast interview, I mentioned your highlights from the seminar that you invited me to take part of in Nashville a few months ago now, right? And you know, I was really pleased to be part of that seminar because, for one, we've known each other for many years, but I've never seen you
That's
actually do
right.
like a seminar, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was like our first time to where I'm actually watching you engaging with an audience abroad, because we've engaged with your customers in country, so to speak, right?
Right at
And
your
having just,
table. Sure.
yeah, having table conversation. And and I was so, I mean, I was really blessed, I guess is a good way to put it, to listen to your points, because they were so clear. They were so things that I take for granted as an Israeli. I don't really think about those things. It's hard to think about these miraculous things. I mean, I do, probably more than most Israelis, but it's hard to keep them all straight. And you kind of did a wonderful, like 7 anomalies about Israel, for example. I got to share that, for example, on that interview. Um, but the reason why I wanted you to kind of talk here on this podcast about your perspective, because what I like about it, it isn't your classic Israel, uh, how to say, nutter crowd, the crazy
Yeah.
Israel nuts, right? People that are just like, like wild eyed about Israel. Israel can do no wrong,
Yeah.
and that was the other thing that you did in the seminars. You pointed out the hard facts, right? You didn't just kind of gloss over that Israel's this perfect country, can do no wrong. And I love that perspective. I felt it was fresh, it was clear, and you really challenged the audience with actual truth, with actual facts that are miraculous. There are anomalies, but they're factual, like historic anomalies, and that's the crazy thing. It's not, you know, the Doron and Doug came together to come up with like some great ideas of how cool Israel is.
Yeah. Right.
Um, could you talk about some of that, and what led you to kind of discover or research that, because I haven't heard with other people, with other pastors or whatever. So I know that what you were sharing, it was like your stuff. And that's what I loved about it too. It was your unique research.
Yeah, I mean, for years, if I would be speaking at a church, I'd be talking more about Israel theology and coming from it from a biblical perspective. And what always sort of frustrated me was that, I could tie all of the pieces together, but there would always be some people at the end that would come to me and say, "Yeah, that was really interesting. That was a really nice talk, but I think," and then they would give me, their opinions of whatever, as if this was all just a cerebral intellectual conversation. And I'm trying to go, like, no, like this is a real place with real people. Like, this is actually unfolding. And so that was some of why I ended up doing some of these photo books, is that and the basis of the photo books, and I'll just mention them and I will get to your points, is that I just came to a point where I'm really kind of done discussing your theological arguments in whatever church denomination or whatever of how you view things, or replacement theology, or all of it. Like, I'm really kind of done with those conversations. Let me show you what the prophets talked about. Let's talk about actual factual history, as if you're reading history about the Civil War or the World War II, or anything. Let's look at actual factual documented history, and then let's look at what's happening right now and put those pieces together. And can we determine, has anything else like this happened ever before on earth? And that's sort of where I began. And that's sort of the basis of both Israel Rising and Jerusalem Rising with the photo books. When I talk about those books, I'm not talking about, well, hey, here's a nice then and now coffee table books that has some cool pictures. Because sometimes people will say, well, New York, Tokyo, like these places, any of these places look better now than they did 100 years ago. And yes, that's true. But none of these places have any type of ancient writings that foretell the entire process, except the Jewish people and except this particular land. And, where the prophets talk about God is going to remove the people, the land's going to be desolate and forgotten, it's going to be overrun by the nations. We know from the time of the Romans up until 1948, this land has been conquered and reconquered multiple times. It never becomes a homeland for any other people group. There's no nation that moves in and makes Jerusalem a capital of any other people group or anything. And we know from historical eyewitness accounts from Christians, Muslims, and Jews what the land looked like literally for the last 2,000 years. So we know that it's been empty and desolate and forgotten, not because I think so, but because we have photo documentation going back to the 1840s. We have eyewitness accounts from, again, Christians, Muslims, and Jews from all different viewpoints from all around the world, all describing the same thing. And so I began looking at this from a very practical, tangible thing, is like, listen, you can believe whatever sort of silly theology or intellectual reasonings that you want, but there's facts on the ground. So you can either stick your head in the sand and believe whatever you want to believe, or like an intelligent person, you can actually just look at what's actually happening in real life. And for some reason, especially within the church world, even more in the last couple of years, there has been this unusually I don't even know what the right word is, this unusual disconnect where people say, yeah, that's really nice what's going over here, but my theology says, and I think that this is what this means. And I'm going, but, and we'll get into it in just a moment, but like there are more than one historical anomalies that have never happened with any other people group anytime throughout history, and they all surround the Jewish people. So if you're believing replacement theology, which is basically just that God is done with Israel, the church has replaced Israel. And to me, one of the most damning aspects of the replacement theology isn't that just disconnect of those two, but it's how people view prophecy, because it's suddenly not, it doesn't really mean what it says. It's not really Israel. It's not really talking about the land. It's really talking about allegorical and spiritual and metaphor and symbolic, and who knows what it really means. Maybe one day when we get to heaven, we can figure it all out. And I could understand how prior to 1948, you could maybe believe that, because the Jewish people have been out of the land for, 1,800 years at that point. And I mean, that's a lot of history. Like, is that ever really going to happen? Probably not. Maybe this is really what it means. But if the nation of Israel has shown us anything in the last 78 years since 1948, is that the prophets were darn accurate, man. I mean, they were spot on with locations and things being restored historically in a way that human history across any ancient people group has never seen before. It's never occurred, and the prophets are describing this stuff line by line by line. And much of the church world for the last 1800 years has been saying, it doesn't really mean what it means. And now that it's unfolding exactly as it means, then suddenly these famed seminaries or popular TV preachers are having to decide: do I stick to 1800 years of replacement theology taught in these famed seminaries, or do I actually look at facts on the ground as you and I would do in any other aspect of life, and realize, okay, well, maybe how I understood something was wrong, because historically, if God is really in control of history, if God is really telling his story, as we say with history, if this is really unfolding, then maybe God is in it and I haven't just realized it because I've had these other thoughts. Maybe it's time to kind of change my own viewpoint. And so that's a longer answer, but for me, this was something that it was really birthed out of sort of the frustration of having these conversations and having people say, yeah, that's really interesting, but I think, and I remember thinking, like, I'm not here for an intellectual argument. I am telling you the things that are going on. So I just realized I'm going to put, while I am all about the prophets and I'm all about diving into the scriptures and making those connections historically, archaeologically, intellectually, rationally, like I'm all about putting those things, connecting your faith with, on earth. Let's put that spiritual stuff aside and let's look at historical, factual anomalies that have never happened before in human history, and why it is that it only surrounds one people group. And so at some point, it becomes easier just to say, oh, well, God says he's made an everlasting covenant with Israel, and he's going to bring the people back to the land, and he's going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Well, over here, historically, I'm seeing those things unfold, and now we're at a place where we can document it. And some of the documentation is in the photo books. Some of it's from some video stuff. I know, of course, you're involved in a lot of that as well. But helping people to put some pieces together to basically saying, stop being an idiot. Like, open your eyes and look at what is directly in front of you. Now, if you're ignoring facts on the ground because of your own biases, that's a whole other issue. But the fact is, whether you like it or not, these things are unfolding, and we'll talk about that as we get going. But for me, that was sort of the realizing people's disconnect, especially within the church world, of saying, well, this is what Jesus says to me, or this is what God has said to me, and this is how I read. Okay, well, great. But even from a Christian discipleship standpoint, isn't what is taught in churches that we try to form our lives according to the scriptures and not make the scriptures fit according to what our own opinions are, and that's some of what I come back to with some of these pastors and saying, okay, when you talk about discipling people, don't you tell people to realign your earthly life with scriptural foundations, but yet when you talk about Israel, you're ignoring truth on the ground for your own intellectual opinions. Like what part of the Bible are you not following for this? Like what is the disconnect here? Because how you talk about discipleship and how you talk about Israel is in two different worlds, and it both comes down to the same thing. Do you believe the truth of Scripture and what the prophets have foretold? It's either a yes or a no. In my mind, it's either a yes or no. Do you want your life to be guided by Scripture, or do you want your opinion of Scripture to be guided by whatever you think your life is? And to me, that is the real conflict that comes down to this issue is, and when we're talking about, Israel in general, is that this is something that is unfolding in our day. The prophets foretold it. And if you are removing the prophets and the things that the Bible talks about, a lot of this is really confusing. A lot of this is hard to understand. Like all the pundits say, it's hard, it's confusing, it's a never-ending, blah blah blah. No one will be able to figure it out. They've been fighting for years. They'll always fight, whatever. If you actually read the prophets, they actually lay this out very, very clearly.
Hmm.
And I know you and I have talked, with some of my groups sitting at your table, is that, I mean, even Hamas, Hezbollah, all of these Islamic groups, everybody agrees, except the Western Church, that this is a spiritual war and spiritually motivated from the ground up. And the only place in the world where that does not connect is in the Christian Church in America. That from I'm painting with a broad brush. I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus, of course,
Correct. Yeah.
but that is something that is shocking to me, is that even when your enemies say this is a spiritual war and the church has gone, it's really not. It's really political. It's really, it's really about, at some point you have to believe your enemy when he says, we're going to come kill you. And
Yeah, I think part of the problem in the West, because it's not just in the United States, I notice it's kind of and again, like we're saying in broad strokes here, it's not every American and not every
of course,
Westerner, European, but the sentiments that I'm getting from the West a lot in the disconnect is because you're trying to understand the Middle East with your worldviews, with your democracy, with your, like your norms, and not realizing that the Middle East is very different to you. Just like to me, as a Middle Easterner who grew up in the Middle East, I cannot understand Asians. When I traveled to Asia, okay, I've been to a few countries in Asia, and for me, it was culture shock. It's like,
yeah,
what in the world are they doing? Like the caste system. You know, like some dude opening the stall door for me and cleaning off the toilet before I go use the restroom, and I was just like, I was appalled. Like, dude, what are you doing, man? Like, hello, it's degrading to you, and it's degrading to me. I don't need a slave, you know and you start to realize that there are certain things and mindsets that are no, they are different than you, and you just the Western mindset is like, with this so-called white guilt, if you like, is also projected onto the Israeli Arab conflict. I don't call it Palestinian conflict because there isn't such a thing as Palestinians. They're Arabs, and that's the problem, is you guys call them whatever they want you to call them because of the propaganda machine that was created post 1948. But ironically, before 1948, you wouldn't find one Arab who would call themselves a Palestinian, because that was
right.
an insult to the tribal Arab mind that these folks come from. Um, but you see European Jews as like, oh, so that's the white guild. Those are the colonialists. That's just like us. No, it's not. These are white Jews, if you like, Europeans that were persecuted in Europe. They were the punching bag of Europe. They were the most mistreated people group.
Hmm.
And by the way, the majority of Israelis, and you know this, and I try to repeat this as many times as possible because I realize this is part of the disconnect. I'm like, the majority of Israelis are Arab Jews from
That's
Arab
right.
lands.
That's right.
Okay. The dark skin, these are the ones that I grew up with. So I'm more Middle Eastern and more Arabish in my mindset than I am in my accent. So people judge by, a cover by its book, right? And, it's just so ignorant. And I think that's where a lot of this disconnect comes. And where I notice with Jewish, social rights groups coming here, from America, and
Mhm.
projecting their mindset onto a reality here, and like, oh no, that kid, he went to an example. He went to a checkpoint with a knife in his backpack so that the soldiers would catch him because he was being beaten at home. He's a runaway and he wants to be thrown in prison. He wanted to get caught with the knife so he'd get thrown in prison so he could finish his homework. I go, what? What planet are you from, lady? Like,
Yeah.
okay, stop. I'm like, and I asked her a few questions. I said, how many of all these guys that you gave examples of, because this is an anti-military checkpoint and military strategy to fight terrorism, essentially is what they are. But they're Westerners, right? These are Jews that made Aliyah, and they're all like American, background. And I ask simple questions. Well, what is the number of guys versus girls who you interviewed that were these runaways, as you call them? Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. I asked them like 3 times and they don't know. They don't remember. I'm like, oh, okay. See, you
Convenient.
don't want to talk about the facts. Okay. See, that's irritating to me as a counterterrorist guy who's been fighting terrorists for a long time. And I know that's total BS for 2 reasons. Number one, they're over 90% are guys. That's a fact. And there are no runaways in the Arab culture because that is disowning your culture. You might as well put a bullet in your head.
Yeah.
You don't do that. You just don't do that. And I was like, that's nonsense. And you're telling me that's so he could finish his homework in prison? You know, I mean, do you understand how detached from reality y'all are? And that's just insane. So that's just one example. And you have plenty of these. Like, can you give your friends from the West, from America, as we were pointing out that there's a disconnect? Can you point out some personal examples that you had as an American that you had eye-opening experiences that are similar to that, where you realize, oh, it's my worldview that's actually different versus the reality on the ground in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, even as you were talking, I was thinking of multiple examples, but the one that
Yeah.
I most commonly hear, I mean, even as recently as a couple weeks ago, is this, and again, I'm talking from a sort of a traditional evangelical Western Christian view of why all the killings, like why does Israel have to keep bombing Hezbollah, and why do they have to keep haven't they destroyed enough, and haven't they, and where the disconnect comes is that in America, thankfully, most Americans have zero concept of what evil is,
Mm,
in terms of the level of violence, the level of commitment to violence,
mhm.
and actually, again, believing what your enemy actually says. And so, going back to biblical times, when again, from the West, when we read about God telling Israel to wipe out entire, like, wipe out the Amalekites, or wipe out these completely, not, don't leave anything left. um, that's really hard for Americans to wrap their head around in
Mhm.
Israel. And again, I'm certainly talking to the choir, and far better than I do. But from some of the things that you've even shown me, in your home, of coming out of what was being found in homes in Gaza, and the things that normal, families were living in, or believing in, in Gaza. There is just a level of evil that does not compute in the West when we're talking about a family, or an ideology, or parents who are excited that their children blow themselves up on buses, or try to kill Jews, or, like, there is a deep-seated evil. Like, how do you address a deep-seated evil that is very openly committing themselves to, I'm going to kill you, and if I don't, I'm going to make sure my children and my grandchildren do, because we're going to fight to the last man, because this is what we believe, and you have no right to exist, and there's no discussion. Like, how do you, like,
Yeah.
I ask pastors this, how do
Zero
you,
acceptance of the other.
exactly. And I grew up in a Mennonite community, where if you can just bring two people together, you can have some conflict resolution, you can hear the other side, you can understand, and you can kind of put yourselves in their shoes, and that's just sort of how you come to peace. You can do that if you have people in the same community. But when you have two very different ideologies that are trying to accomplish that, you're already at a loss. And so I'm saying to pastors, what would you do when you have your neighbors who have sworn to you personally, straight, face to face, we will kill you, kill all of your family. If you kill me in the process, I'm going to make sure my family and my community and my grandchildren finish the job. Then they are an unrepentant evil, directly open about their plans. Like, what do you do? And the pastors that I've had asked these questions to, they don't have an answer. And I'm not trying to pin anybody to the wall, but just to
Mhm.
make the point is that you know when what a good shepherd does, King David, as a good shepherd, there are times you have to kill the lion and the bear. You have to
Yeah.
do what needs to be done to protect the sheep, because that's what good shepherds do. And you're not making peace with the lion and the bear and hoping everything works out. Now, if the lion and the bear, as many have, and I know you and I both have examples, if people who grew up in Hezbollah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad or whatever change their view and come back and turn from that, of course they've been accepted in Israel. Of course, they've been some of the greatest spokesmen that are Arabs that
Yeah.
are spirit-filled believers now that are speaking at churches who grew up in Hamas or in some of the PLO or whatever. Of course they're welcomed into Israel. Of course they're repentant. Of course there were nobody who's looking to kill them. But we're talking about an unrepentant evil, and that is something that
Nobody in Israel. Nobody in Israel is looking.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Where they came out of, they are in danger for their lives for speaking up.
That's right. Exactly. But just those concepts in the West is so foreign. It is difficult to wrap your head around. And again, just talking about the different cultural aspects. I think in the West, sometimes people, if even they'll go to Israel and they say, well, a lot of people spoke English, and I had some American friends that moved. It's almost, they think that Israel is, an extension of their culture, and that's just simply not the case.
It's a good point. That's a good point. I haven't thought of that, but that's a really good point. And I think it's just important also to point out here, neither you or me, to my knowledge, are anti-Palestinian. In fact, a lot of times when I'm speaking, especially in the United States, when I try to explain what we're up against, I'll hear somebody will usually say, well, you should just bomb them all, kill them all, and crazy things like that, right? Yeah. And I have to correct them and say, hey, listen, being pro-Israel doesn't mean being anti-Palestinian, because Absolutely. The Palestinians, to use that term, are a people. I'm not anti-human being, I'm anti-evil, and I'm anti-evil ideology and actions that lead to the death of others. And in some cases, we have to eliminate that evil. And in Israel, unfortunately, it's all too often. But so people get a little bit of understanding. I just saw a documentary from Tzvi Cheskeli, who's one of our top reporters on the Islamic agenda, the jihadist Islamic agenda and worldview, and and why Israelis don't understand these people. Like, we're talking about why Westerners don't. I'm going to tell you why we don't understand our enemy, because we don't have that kind of a worldview. It's so foreign to us. Tzvi brought a guy onto this show because they were talking about speaking to the Nukhba terrorists, interrogating them, the Nukhba terrorists, and the things that they shared on their missions, their ideology. Like, why did they do what they did? I mean, like, it's pure evil. Like, do you understand? Yeah. And they're like, no, it's according to the Quran and what they taught us and the hadiths and so on. It's totally okay. What do you mean? Jewish blood, there's no sweeter blood than Jewish blood. This is a statement from one of these Nukhba terrorists. This is a worldview. They've been brainwashed to believe this. And you're like, how do you rationalize with somebody like that tells you to your face, there's no sweeter blood than American blood? What do you do with that? Are you going to have a debate with someone like this? You're going to have, dialogue? I mean, go ahead, show me how, please. Because if there is a way to do that other than military violence, I'm open for it. Because as someone who's spent over 20 years of fighting violence and countering terrorism, I can tell you it's no cakewalk. Nobody enjoys doing the dirty work of eliminating evil. I'm telling you that right now. Yeah. Except for some psychopaths, maybe, but none of the guys in my team are like that, or anybody I've ever served with. And then the other thing that he had on his show, he had this guy who grew up in Lod, and you know where Lod is because you've been here and you're way more versed than most. But Lod is one of our largest Arab cities in central Israel. Lod is also a crime-riddled city. It's got low income. It's got Muslim extremists that carry out crimes against Jews and so on and so forth. So it's just one of those like Chicago's of Israel, if you like.
Mm.
And this kid grew up radicalized. So he wasn't part of the nominal Muslim community, which is the majority, thank God. But his family was pretty radical, and they he said at 13, because he questioned too many of these ideals of this crazy, like sweet, no sweeter blood than Jewish blood and all this stuff. They sent him to Gaza. They literally smuggled him into Gaza so he could get radicalized, so he could
Wow.
come back a better Muslim. Think about that for a minute. So, and he was one of 20, if I remember correctly, and he's like the 12th child. So he's somewhere in the middle.
Mm.
Um, and so he talks about his experience of going to Gaza, part of the going to the mosque there, which was the school where he was basically like an orphan, if you like, right? Because his family's not with him. I mean, just think about this for a minute, folks. Like this young boy was sent off, disconnected from the family to be raised by radical Muslims. And he
Mm.
said, while there, so Tzvi asked him, what was one of the harsh experiences that you experienced while you were being brainwashed? He said, two of the boys had too friendly of a relationship, so they were deemed homosexuals. And so then they murdered both of them in front of us. What?
Whoa.
In front of you at the age of
Whoa.
13? He goes, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So we would learn what not to do. So imagine this. They're doing this to them, to their own people group. Yeah. These aren't Jews. Yeah. And by the way, for all those who are listening, the LGBTQ crowd, go ahead, go to Gaza. Go ahead. This is what they're
Yeah.
teaching these young boys. Go ahead. See if they're going to embrace you. And you think people like us are radical. This is a personal account, personal experience. So what happens is, long story short, he's on his way to become a terrorist. And at some point, I forget exactly why, but he changed paths, got out of that somehow by miracle, came back to Israel, changed his path completely. He actually then converts and becomes a Jew. And today he's a practicing Jew. Now,
Wow.
let me tell you something. I've seen a lot of terrorists, right? When I see this guy, and this is an important fact because there's a spiritual aspect to this. When I look at this guy, he doesn't have the same aura of him, of this, like, there's a certain aura within the radical Islamic community that it's like you're not able to have a dialogue with these people. It's like they're not free. You get what I mean? Like there's a bondage. And this dude, you would never know he was an Arab. You would never have known that he was Muslim. You would never have known that he was a radical. You would have never known that he was trained to become a terrorist, except for the fact that he has this massive scar on his head, from the beatings that he took while getting a good, proper Islamic upbringing, so to speak. And just to hear the clarity coming from this guy, because again, I'm comparing his dialogue, his speech, his body language. These are things that when you're into the world that I'm in, you look at, and it kind of threw me off because I'm just like, this guy was a Muslim terrorist? No, dude, no way. It's hard to believe it because of the transformation of his life and the way his mannerisms and everything. It's like he's completely transformed human being.
Wow.
So yeah, you can have dialogue with people like this. You can have dialogue with those that come out of that. But those who are in it, it is a very unfortunate reality that the whole of the Gaza Strip have been so brainwashed. And guess who's the number one contributor to that brainwashing? It's not Hamas. It's not Hezbollah. It's not the IRGC from Iran. It's the United Nations. The United Nations and the connotation, and this was another point that I was like blown away from, their worldview and their connotation of UN is where you get all these Islamic extremists, jihadists, radicalized, Jewish blood is sweeter than any other blood teaching you get there at these United Nations schools. So that's their connotation with that, because they accommodate and use all their resources to the Islamists and the extremists to raise generations of brainwashed kids.
I'm going to interrupt you. I just want you to say that again because I of course know this and you know this, but this is not something I hear a lot. Tell me again about what the Arabs are saying they're learning in UN schools.
So the United Nations schools and facilities and humanitarian aid and everything, the way they see this, because when you go to school, like whatever the name of your school was, something something high, right? I went to Vitso, for example. Um, my connotation was I went to study art. I went to study photography. I went to study history and all these subjects that we learned. So my connotation with the name Vitso, it's that. Um, the connotation for these young kids, these young boys and girls, when they see the United Nations logo on a building, those nice, beautiful blue letters, which I've seen them hundreds of times in Gaza, by the way. I've seen all these facilities. They're completely destroyed because we had to take them out because they were housing weapons. They were places for propaganda and brainwashing.
Yeah.
And it's not just the United Nations facilities, it's the school, it's the school actually, sorry. It's the the hospitals, the mosques, the your bedroom, all of everything around you. In fact, Gaza, they pointed this out too. Gaza, because I was shocked. Okay, I was there 20 years ago, and Gaza wasn't what it is today. Okay,
Mm.
that my takeaway was what these people are saying, that Gaza, it confirmed what I experienced. That Gaza was basically created as a massive battleground to fight the IDF. Every home, every school, every mosque, every hospital, everything's catered towards the ideology, like you were saying earlier. I'm just trying to overemphasize for you because I want people to understand we're not hating on these people; they're hating on us. And it's
Yeah.
because they have been spoon fed propaganda from zero. And it's sickening and it's hard for me to accept that no matter how many of these bad guys we take out, it's the whole population has been radicalized, and have they gotten the power to do so, they will kill me. That's a reality, you know. In fact, these Nukhba guys, they asked them, they said, if you had the power right now, would you kill me? Oh, absolutely. There's nothing that would stop me from doing that. It's not like they're regretful, they're remorseful, and imagine, like, if you've ever done any studies on what are they called, serial killers, and how they're disconnect from reality, no remorse, no this. Imagine that, but for full whole society, with very small exceptions, like this young man who today is he's an adult. I think he's older than I am now, but as he's telling his testimony of how he got out of that, he's like one exception. And you mentioned a few that you were talking about that speak in the United States. I'm assuming you're talking about Musab Hassan Youssef, the Green Prince, and a
Sure,
few
sure.
others. Former Hezbollah guys, former all these terror groups that I've heard their stories as well, and it's refreshing, and I'm glad and I'm happy that some of them break out of that. But I think the West doesn't understand how seeped within this it is, and the ones who have their hands the bloodiest, it's the United Nations, hands down. I'm sorry, you know, uh, they should know better.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, and back to the point of like having Palestinian friends, I've got some good friends that are Palestinian Christians in Bethlehem, and just in Bethlehem alone, in the last 25 years since that town was given to the Palestinian Authority, the Christian population has dropped from 80% down to I don't know what it is now. It's single digits. I want to say it's 4 or 5%. I mean, just a dramatic, dramatic drop, and that is what's considered a moderate Palestinian-run city. And so I've have Christian, Arab, Palestinian friends who will quietly tell me behind closed doors, who aren't radicalized like we're talking about, but most Palestinians who are not in that will quietly tell you, "I hope Israel comes in and takes over everything." Yes, I don't agree with different Israeli policies. Yes, I have problems, whatever, but at least there's some aspect of rule of law. At least there's a paper trail for that can that Jewish leaders are imprisoned for because of corruption. Like at least there's something like that within the Palestinian world. It's who you know or whose money that you're taking, and so again,
Yeah.
these are concepts that for Americans in the West, um, but especially within the church world, if you just love and you pray and you love on your neighbor, then everything's going to be going to be well. And I'm not trying to again disparage that or even mock that, but
Yeah.
there are realities on the ground where there is a lot of very popular Christian theology that just doesn't work when the rubber meets the road. You must defend you must defend the sheep, and you must be able to defend people from an ideology that is inherently evil, like
Yeah.
you've been talking about. And then for me, coupling that, and this is sort of to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, a funny thing is that you couple that with this Western church. Again, forgive me, I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush, but this is a comment that I get a lot when I'm speaking in different churches, is this sort of ideological romantic view of Israel. Sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, you're in Israel all the time. You must be so close to God, and you must interact with the angels, and you must be interact like people are saying this like legit for real. You must
Wow.
like interact with angels all the time." And I'm like, well, if by angels you mean like the little old ladies that crash their shopping cart into yours to get the cucumbers before you do at the grocery store, yeah, I interact with angels all the time. Like I see that a lot, and so
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
there's this silly romantic view within the church world of if you just pray this certain way and that everything will be fine, and it's really all like we don't have to get our hands dirty with what really needs to be done.
Yeah.
That is one of the primary disconnects. I think a little bit of a fun little rabbit trail we just took there. We're like talking about the realities on the ground, but when we're talking about communicating to the Western world, especially which is primarily Christian, the facts on the ground that are actually real, part of the problem, in my opinion, and what I've experienced in trying to speak into these different things, and why I've approached it from much more of a rational, intellectual, historical approach, is how do you say to large churches, listen, most of what you believe about Israel um, is fantasy. Like it's not real. Like it's not like you have these concepts and these views of what the land is like, and portions of those are true, but there are large portions that again do not translate. And that's for me, that's one of the reasons why I like bringing small groups to Israel versus large bus trips, is because you have an opportunity to I have an opportunity to call up my buddy Doron and say, hey, I've got 8 people. What are you doing this Shabbat? Can I bring people over to sit at your table and we can have these conversations over the table? And we've done that a couple times. With even in your home, which has been beautiful. And with those groups, of all the places I've taken them and all the places I've shown them or things we've gotten involved with, I've heard repeatedly the highlight for most people is sitting in a Jewish home, having real conversation and hearing what's really going on, especially for somebody like you that's involved in
Mm.
counterterrorism, and hearing the facts on the ground. People want to really know what's happening on the ground, that they're not getting the news, or they're
Mm.
not getting the truth of what that is. Again, some of that, in my opinion, is sort of like the spiritual ideology that is just causing part of the problems. And so for me, again, when we're talking about trying to educate, there are historical facts on the ground that I want to get into and even just talk a little bit about them, that have never happened with any other people group. And so throughout history, any other time other than history, other than right now, and the scriptures foretold this stuff 2,700 years ago in a way that no other people group even has. And so, just again, so
Yeah.
if we're talking about some of these historical anomalies, like there is no other ancient people group. Okay, the Romans, the Chinese, the Greeks, the Persians, like pick any ancient people group. No ancient people group has any type of prophetic writings that foretell the destruction and the scattering of the people throughout the world, to then come back to the exact same historical homeland to rebuild a nation, thousands of years later, except the Jewish people. So that alone, throughout history, has never happened before. Another anomaly that I talk about on the regular to kind of make that point is that there's no people group who've been on a particular piece of land, any piece of land in the world, that have been then conquered or forcibly removed, that then came back to that same piece of land to survive and thrive for a couple hundred years, to then again be conquered and forcibly removed, scattered throughout the world, to then come back almost 2,000 years later to the exact same piece of real estate as their ancestors, speaking the same language, talking about the same scriptures and same history, and rebuilding their ancient cities. Like this has never happened once in human history, and Israel's done it twice. And the prophet Isaiah talks about that God will bring his people back a second time to the land of Israel. He's not going to do it once, he's going to do it twice. And where we see that is that the first time the people are conquered, they're conquered to Babylon and Assyria, and then after 70 years they come back the first time in the Bible under Ezra and Nehemiah. And there for a few hundred years, conquered again by the Romans, scattered throughout the world. The time when the people are returning a second time to the land is right now. And Isaiah prophesied this 2,600 years ago. So again, number one, no other people group has been connected to that piece of land and have been scattered and returned once, let alone twice. And no other people group has any type of ancient writings that foretell the whole process down to the detail. And so yeah. I'm communicating these non-spiritual truths that are anomalies within surrounding the Jewish people, and trying to communicate that to Christians and saying, now let's open your Bible, because your Bible describes the whole thing. And so to me, what it really comes down to, and this is something I say a lot, is that, especially when it comes down to Israel, is that, and I'm talking to churches, is God sovereign, yes or no? And of course, everybody says yes. Well, then if God is sovereign, then doesn't he have the right to choose any particular people group, put them on any piece of land for any length of time that he chooses, without my opinion? And, and if the answer is yes, well, God is sovereign and he has the right to do that without my opinion, then we should probably listen to a sovereign God. So my point is that when you boil it down, if you follow the God of the Bible, then you would want to follow the decisions that he's already made, things that he's already put in place. And if you don't want to follow that, then maybe you aren't really interested in the God of the Bible. But so when it comes down to it, like to me, it becomes less about Israel and more about your faith with the God of the universe and your interactions with him. Is that if God would have chosen the Peruvian people, the nation of Peru, for whatever his purposes were, I would want to have a heart for Peru or for the nation, for the Peruvian people, simply because God had made that decision. Yes. And so for me, that it comes down to an issue. Is it really about Israel? Is it really about the land? It is simply because God says so. But the fact is, he's the one that made the decision. And if you're reading your Bible and you have a relationship with the God of the Bible, then you have a major problem here. Are you going to follow the things that he's already said and he's already decided? Because if you're not willing to listen to your God and the things that he's already telling you, maybe he's not your God. Maybe that's the problem. And so to me, like Hamas says, like Hezbollah says, it really is a spiritual issue. It comes down to these spiritual truths. The fact is that in most basic elements, the God of Genesis 1 has made promises and made covenants with a particular people group, and there is an ancient evil who is against and opposing everything that God wants to do. And that's what it's coming down to. And so while the people are out of the land and the land is desolate, what's there to fight about? But wait, the God of Genesis 1 is keeping his covenant promises, and now they're coming back to the land, and the land is physically responding the way that Ezekiel says, and they're rebuilding the waste and forgotten cities like Zechariah talks about, and the people are being multiplied back on the land, and God is actually keeping his word exactly as he said that he would. Well, now there's a problem. And so, and this is a bit of a different conversation, I want to get your thoughts on it too, but I mean, there is a direct correlation between the strengthening and the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948 and Israel becoming stronger and more established and more peaceful and more secure, more prosperous, and a very radical form of Islam whose primary focus is the hatred and the destruction of that very same people group. So you see, as Israel's becoming more established, 100 years ago, when Israel's not a nation, you know, Islam is basically a dead religion of sorts, with a few radical pockets here and there, but it's nothing like what's happening now. And you see these direct correlations, and to me, it comes back to the fact that God is finally fulfilling His word and doing exactly what He says, and He's doing exactly what the prophets laid out. He said that He would do.
Yeah. And you see the spiritual reaction to those that need to justify why they superseded the Jews, why they superseded the Christians, right? Because they came last to the party, right? and so it's like they have to come up with these crazy justifications. And that's the other thing that is just it's mind blowing. It's like you try to have a rational conversation with your classic Muslim that believes either what their spiritual teachers have taught them, right? The imam, at the local mosque, and or whatever they've read. If they have, most Muslims haven't read the Quran or the Hadiths and studied them. So it's on different levels, right? Just like nominal Christians who say they're Christian, but how many of them have actually read the Bible and know what it says, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
It's like that, right? And what's interesting is it's like but the ones who are debating, the ones who are countering and trying to challenge Christianity and Judaism, it's like they come up with the craziest stuff, like, well, you know what? Adam was a Muslim, like, to end all the argument. You're right. Like,
Yeah.
now what? Like, God's a Muslim. It's like, what? Like, like, is there anything that's not, or anyone who is not in all of world history? And it's just I just want people who are listening. Again, I'm not trying to hate on the Muslim world. Both Doug and I, we have real Muslim friends, not like those, so-called white people that says, I have a black friend, so I can say something racist now.
Right.
That's not the point I'm making. But we have real friends, and we have these real dialogues. And I'm very careful to talk to them about Islam so directly, because I'm not trying to offend them. So we're friends because of things that we find it mutually that we can agree on and develop a relationship on.
Yeah, like normal people do.
Like normal people do.
Yeah.
But it's like the point is, to my knowledge, because I've been with you and you've been with me in Israel and interacting with the multicultural community that we have here, neither one of us have, any documented history of being anti-Muslim,
Right.
We're just giving real critiques, real historic context to this conflict, because the more you try to ignore this and these facts, the more you're just going to get in the weeds of the why. And so that's all. This is for historic context. It's for understanding, like Doug, you made a great point there, that even for the Islamic world, Islam wasn't necessarily at its peak when the Jewish people started to come back to the land of Israel. During the Ottoman period, they weren't necessarily like a very radical Muslim community. In fact, they were building clock towers because they were trying to show how progressive they were, how they were, of the time, so to speak, pun intended. And
Yeah.
you've seen these clock towers all throughout Israel, and you're like, why would somebody build, a Muslim leader build clock towers in his within his empire, in a backwater part of his empire? Because Israel wasn't of huge significance. Jerusalem wasn't of huge significance. But it was like in the 1800s, the West was waking up, Christianity was waking up, and also Islam was waking up to, oh, there's gold here. I had gold all this time. I didn't know it. Right. Yeah. And so he starts building train systems, clock towers. None of the Muslim community or Jewish community, for the most part, even have a watch because they're all, they're all Arab culture, right? Middle Eastern.
Yeah,
Like they don't know what a clock is. Keep time for what? What do you need time
yeah.
for?
What do you need that for?
Yeah, like I don't even know how many seconds there is in a minute. Yeah, these are people that work the fields, or tradesmen and so on. It was so irrelevant, but yet he
Yeah,
did it. Why? So that for the train station. Why? Because he wanted to show he's progressive, right?
yeah,
But if you looked at the Temple Mount, right, and you have pictures of this that illustrate it beautifully, it is
yeah.
full of weeds. It is full of stickers. It's like overgrown, and it's basically dead and unkept. And you're like, what? Within the Islamic Empire? Because the only reason why Jerusalem was of any significance within Islam, because it's traditionally not, is because of the Syriatic community and the caliphs over there, the leadership, their heads, however you want to call it, right? Like the head of those tribes tried to bring a Hajj to this area. And so they were the ones that built the mosque there and tried to bring, and like, oh, it worked for the Jews, it'll work for us. And it didn't, and it failed. And it literally, like you said, leading up until the 1800s, when everybody started to wake up to the land of Israel. But really, it was when the Jews started to wake up to the land of Israel with the Shivat Zion, and they're starting to build waterworks and electrical plants and so on, agriculture, and the list goes on. And then you had Arabs that came from all over the Middle East for job opportunity for these crazy Jews that are like bringing this desert armpit, reviving it, right? As
For sure.
Mark Twain pointed out beautifully. So just read Mark Twain and tell me about the beautiful Islamic empire that these Jewish colonialists came and took away from. Tell us all about it, because Mark Twain wasn't too impressed.
It's funny you make that comment. Years ago, when I was doing some interviews with Israel Rising, and we didn't talk about the books much, but in just to mention, in Israel Rising, I have over 100 photo comparisons from over 25 locations all over the land. And in the back of the book, I have firsthand accounts for almost every century for the last 2,000 years, from Christians, Muslims, and Jews talking about what the land looked like. I was doing an interview during that book tour, probably 7-8 years ago. So this is before October 7th, before a lot of the more heightened chaos, and back when people were still talking about a Palestinian state and the Oslo Accords and all that sort of two states living side by side, that whole thing. And the interviewer was very kind off camera or off mic, but when we were live, he wanted to be a little bit more a little more edgy, and so he just asked me while it was live, what do you say to to much of the population who recognizes that Israel is occupying Palestinian land and threw Palestinians off their land? And I said, well, it's a great question, because in Israel Rising, I've got photos from the 1880s up to the 1940s, prior to the state of Israel in 1948, showing what the land looked like. And I've got it all over the land, and all of the photos are like Palestinian cities today: Bethlehem, Nablus, which was Shechem, biblically, and Jericho, like these famed biblical cities. If you can show me where there's a Palestinian thriving community or economy or a city or anything, I'm happy to give you these books for free. And suddenly, suddenly the whole conversation changed, and like that was the end. But it's like there. And that's part of why I'm doing the books. We're not talking about theology. We're not talking about I've got a better idea than you. We're talking about verifiable facts.
We're not talking about narratives. It's not your narrative versus my narrative.
And it's proof.
It's exactly.
And so for me, when I'm again going back to sort of the church world, is like at this point I sort of make these sort of bold, shocking statements, but I stand by them. Is that I tell these churches, the words of your prophets are coming to pass right now today, and I've got the proof to show you. I can visually give you evidence. I can give you documented history, verifiable evidence, and visual proof. Like, what else do you want to talk about? Like, I'm done with the theological arguments and the intellectual, whatever. Let's talk about what is actually really happening. Let's talk about, and you mentioned the UN. Can you tell me, of all of the world peoples that are supposed to be represented in the UN, can you tell me why over half of all of the UN resolutions that have ever been done are against Israel. Can
Hmm.
you help me understand why the United Nations for decades has been singled out on one particular people group? Can you tell me, like, and these are, again, historical facts we talk about that are unique about the Jewish people. In the US, the Jewish population is only about 2% of the US population, but they make up for over 60% of all of the US hate crimes. Can you tell
Yeah.
me, like, so when we're talking about Black Lives Matter and all the other stuff, it is beyond, like, what's been happening in the U.S., especially just since October 7th in the last few years. The anti-Semitism, not just anti-Semitism, but just outright attacks against Jewish synagogues and people and families has skyrocketed. 2% of the
Hmm.
country is receiving over 60% of all the hate crimes that are even recorded. Who knows about those that aren't recorded? Why do you think that that's being singled out? Why do you think that the world, when we talk about Jews around the world, we're talking about 0.2%, not 1%, not half of a percent, 0.2% of the world's population? Why is it that the world is so obsessed on 0.2% over a piece of land that was a dump 100 years ago? Like, again, I got photos, like, how, make this make sense to me. And if you're looking at facts and figures of, like, why is it that people are losing their mind over this little piece of land that, again, nobody is has any type of personal skin in the game, I guess you could say, from around the world.
Hmm.
Why is it that these crazy little South American countries are making decisions on how they feel about what's happening a world away? Or why is it that nations are choosing? And again, without the biblical prophets, you go, I see the anomaly. I mean, any rational, intelligent person would have to say, okay, that is a little strange. Why is the world obsessing over 0.2% of the world's population? Why is it that over 60% of all hate crimes in the US is based around a population of only 2%? Like, that's unusual.
Yeah.
With Without the truth of the scriptures, without the words of the prophets, that is confusing. That is complex. I don't have an answer for that. If you
Yeah.
go back to what the prophets actually said and spelling this out in very clear language, not allegory or symbolic spiritual parallels, but saying God is going to bring his people back to the land. It's happening. The waste and forgotten biblical cities that have been desolate for centuries after being overrun by the nations, those are going to be rebuilt. It's happening. That the
Hmm.
physical land is going to physically respond and begin producing, not only with agricultural, but I mean, just the technology alone that's come out of Israel in the last 50 years has changed how the world does business, how the world communicates, how the world does anything. Just the fact that you and I are having this conversation on computers and laptops and having this
Yeah.
visual thing, all of what we're experiencing right now was developed by Jewish hands in the Jewish city in Tel
Yeah.
Aviv, that was built by Jews because Jews were coming home and they needed a place
Yeah.
to be. Like, that is the only reason you and I are having this conversation. And the people who are listening to this podcast, you are listening to this based on Jewish technology that's been designed in the land of Israel. And
Yeah.
so when we're talking about a unique people group and unique things that are happening, again, aside from the Bible, it makes it hard to wrap our head around. But if you continue reading the prophets, when these things happen, at some point, all nations are going to make decisions on how they feel about Jewish people living on Jewish land that the God of Genesis 1 has given to them as an everlasting covenant. And all of the nations are going to have a choice of how they feel about God making that decision and how they feel about the people that are there. And suddenly it becomes quite clear, because never before in human history have all of the nations of the world begun making decisions on how they feel about a country that didn't exist historically 100 years ago, about a people group that had been on the land 3,000 years before that are now returning, that all of the prophets talked about. Like, everything that's happening on a larger scale, we're seeing unfold. So again, we're coming
Mhm.
back to the aspect of the accuracy of the details of how these factual intellectual, documented historical facts were foretold in the scriptures in a way that it's never happened before in human history, in a way that no other people group can claim within their little world. And these things are unfolding. And ultimately, again, as we said before, this isn't about, and you said early on, I mean, this isn't even about jumping on the Israel bandwagon and waving, blowing the shofars and waving the flags and the whole thing. This is about, do you believe the God of the Bible meant what he said and said what he meant? Because if you do, then there are some clear decisions that you need to make about this little nation and this little people group, and whether you believe those covenants or not, and whether you feel like those are valuable. Because you can make those decisions of, yes, I love God, but I hate Israel, but you're already putting yourself at odds of what the prophets in your own Bible have already laid out and what he's going to be doing. And so, for me, those are it. Again, it's not an issue about the people or the land, in my opinion. It's about, how do you feel about the one who made the decision? Because if you're going to follow God, then don't you want to follow the things that he's already said and laid out, that's saying, this is my plan and what I'm going to do. If you have trouble with that, your trouble isn't with Israel. Your trouble is the one who made those decisions. And so for me, again, back to the sort of the same thing. I'm really done with these goofy, stupid intellectual arguments that have no basis in reality. When the fact is, there is a mountain of physical, historical, documented evidence that Israel is so unique from all of the other nations. Ironically, the Bible actually says that it is just so unique and so treasured. I need to make a decision on whether or not I believe the Bible or not, because it's unfolding either way, and we each have a choice of how we respond to that and what we do with it.
Exactly. We were talking about this earlier. I was telling you about how I just don't call it anti-Semitism anymore. What I'm seeing in the world, because people always find a way to get out of that. And say, well, I'm a Semite, if they're from Arab descent or something, and you're like, okay, and I just roll my eyes. I'm like, yeah, you really love your Semitic heritage, don't you? And when it's convenient. But I just, I've struggled with coming up with a proper term for this insanity that I'm seeing. I mean, it's an insanity. It's an obsession over Israel. It's, you and I are very much involved with Israel as far as our work, our passions, and we talk less about Israel than these people do. Right.
That's right.
And I'm like, what is the deal, dude? Like, you're more fanatic than I am, and I'm Israeli. And so I just come up with a term called Israel derangement syndrome. I haven't heard anybody else say it. Maybe I'm coining it right now. So this is.
I was going to say, I think you just coined it. I'm going to start.
It has to go down in the history books. If you're forever's writing the next dictionary, and years down the line, let it be recorded. But no, I'm joking. But the thing is, that's the only thing that comes to mind. It's like, you're deranged. It's an Israel derangement syndrome. Like, you guys, because even Jews are deranged in their, like, I heard our former prime minister, Ehud Barak, making these crazy claims against the sitting prime minister, just because of political jabbing and posturing that is like throwing Israel under the bus, your country, right? Because of the things that he's saying. And then later, of course, people say, well, see, your prime minister said, and I get thrown that in my face. I'm like, well, what do I do with that? And so, like you said, you have to confront it with what scripture says. If you're a person of faith, if you're not, hey, and you're listening and you made it this far, good on you.
Exactly.
But
see,
we're both
even if you're not a person. I don't mean to interrupt real briefly, just to make the point, is that even if you're not a person of faith, there are unique historical anomalies that all surround the Jewish people that any intelligent, rational person is going to have to say, okay, the Bible is whatever I think it is. I cannot argue with the fact that the technology that has come out of Israel in the last 50 years, the unique historical anomaly, like there is something different about these people, this particular people group that is coming out of this land, and I cannot deny it. And
Yeah.
if you, again, and if you are denying it, then you're ignoring factual, historical, documented history and facts. I mean, that's your own problem at that point. But
Yeah.
that's, to
And
me, that's the fingerprint of God.
yes. And to that point, by the way, many of my clients, because other than doing this stuff, that we're having this conversation and whatnot, one of the things I've done for years is executive protection, right? So I've been with some of the top companies, CEOs of those companies in the globe here. Why? And a lot of them are secular, by the way. Like they don't believe in God at all. And notice I didn't give any names of which corporations or which CEOs. Um,
Sure.
and and I'm telling you, from like what I found interesting is they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. They're willing
Yeah.
to invest in Israel because of what you just said. Because it's not because of religion. If it was because of religion, then they would Israel would be the last stop for them to do that. But they invest here because they see their return on investment and the technology, the R&D that happens here for these big corporations is where groundbreaking technology and therefore profit for them comes from. So it's like they found they found where to invest. So they're stupid too. They're ignorant too. I mean, this to talk into logic here. Like, I mean, so all these
Yeah.
people, I mean, we're talking about billions, if not trillions of dollars. They're stupid. But anyhow, so scripturally, to me, there's no more obvious than what you see in Psalm chapter 2. And this is King David, who is essentially prophesying what's going to happen in the future, because this wasn't in his time when he's writing this. So that's important to understand also that historic context. And he writes, and already in Psalm 2, okay, I don't know how it got canonized, 1, 2, 3, and whatever, all the way through the end there. Like, what was the order? Who made the order? Was this the first one written or the last of, I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is already in the beginning of the book of Psalms that we have, in chapter 2, it says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Creator, the Lord, and against his anointed, saying, Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." And then it continues, and then it says, and then God reacts. He says, "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds him in derision." It's like, he's just like, really? Because this is talking about Israel, because his anointed one comes from, of course, the prophet Messiah, the prophesied Messiah of Israel, and so on, his anointed one. So coming from the tribe of Israel, right? Um, that's what God's word has to say about it. And to me, if you want clarity, because I have people that are frustrated with Israel hatred, and they're more angry than me. They're like, Doron, and they're like cursing in their writing to me of how angry they are. You're like, how do you handle it? How do you keep such a level head? And I go, read Psalm chapter 2. And they read Psalm chapter 2. I said, you calm down now? You good? I said, brother, if this is how God treats these people's threats, who am I to be offended, so to speak, on behalf of the Creator, right? Like you
Exactly.
said, it's God's choosing. I don't need
Yeah.
to get offended. I do get offended because of the personal ugly accusations towards my people. Yes, it's ugly, it's personal. But that aside, I just look at scripture and I get encouraged, and I'm like, bro, bring it. You can hate
Yeah.
all you want. You're
I think
here.
God.
You're
I think
fulfilling
God.
scripture.
I
And I'm
think
going to
God
be
is.
with God. I'm just going to laugh at you because you're deranged.
Yeah, I think God is more than able to defend himself. I think he'll be okay on
Yeah,
that front.
exactly. Exactly. But brother, can you share one of these topics that keeps being raised as well is who is Israel? The God's talking about. Who's this Israel? And I've heard a lot of explanations, many of which mostly annoy me, because you're talking about us as if we're not a people, human beings. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, I know it's a conversation within the Christian world, because you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Jewish people rejected Jesus, then now I can talk about you as like I'm over you. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
this kind of And it's like, bro, man, like, would you have that conversation with a Jew in the room? You know, like, would that be that same conversation? You know, in other words, what I'm saying is when Christians are talking about this question, bro, you need to be like, have a little sensitivity. I don't
Yeah.
talk about Christians like they're just some whatever, you know, like flippant, like other human beings, like a robot, you know. I mean, uh, um, and it just kind of it blows me away how, yeah, just it's that attitude, and then the conclusions are just like wonky. But like to you, and what you've come to understand from Scripture, you know, what is Israel, and what is the church, I guess, then therefore in light of Israel, right? Like, and how do the two work together or separately? Are they both important or not important to each other? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, for me, again, to me, I think that where a lot of the confusion comes for Christians is just bad theology,
Mm,
and just sort of this romanticism of what Israel is or what Israel should be. So sometimes people will say to me, I could support Israel, and and they fill in the gaps of whatever. I could support Israel if they were all Christians, or if they weren't killing Palestinian children, or if were doing this and X, Y, and Z, whatever.
no
And I,
abortions. I'll throw one in there for you. There's a freebie. A
yeah,
nation that
exactly.
supports abortion.
Yeah, exactly. Like
I don't,
if
but you know, legally it's allowed. Just to be
sure,
clear.
exactly. And so I hear
Yeah,
that of like, if basically saying if Israel was morally doing right, then I could support them. And
yeah,
my response is always the same of like, well, I think that's very noble of you. It's just opposite what the prophets said would happen. The prophet said in Ezekiel, he
yeah,
says he's going to bring them all back to the land, and then
yeah,
he's going to pour out his spirit, and then he's going to sprinkle clean water on them, and then they'll be clean, and then the heart of stone will be replaced with the heart of flesh, and they'll look upon the one whom they've pierced and mourn for him like an only son, all this stuff. So I say, listen, I understand, it's very noble, it's very I understand the heart behind it. I'm just telling you, it's opposite what the prophet said. I mean, so the way that Israel is coming into the land today is the same way that Israel came into the land at the time of Moses. Before they go
mhm,
across the land, Moses, or go across the river, Moses very clearly tells the people in Deuteronomy, listen, when you get across, don't think that it's your own righteousness that brought you here. Like, you guys are hard-headed and stiff-necked and you don't listen.
yep,
That's not like your morality is not the basis of you walking into the land and receiving these things, which that alone, for again, I'm doing my best to kind of not paint with a broad brush, but
yeah,
that view alone is what's really challenging for a lot of Christians. Is, wait a minute, God is going to give Israel the land even though that they don't care about him? Yes, the answer is yes, because it's not based on the people. Again, it's based on what God has already promised. And that's what Moses
yeah,
says. He says, I'm going to bring you into the land. Don't think it's because of your righteousness or that you earned it in some way, because you're hard-headed and you're stiff-necked. But I'm keeping the promise that I've made to your forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm keeping my covenant. I'm doing what I said I'm going to do. So the fact that God is bringing primarily secular Israelis who are happy to make Tel Aviv. And now I was reading some things about the gay pride stuff down in the Dead Sea and all the stuff that they want to do down there, like all of the crazy things. The fact that, like, if
and
you're
the
looking
irony of that too, by the way, Sodom and
exactly,
Gomorrah.
I know, I thought about that,
It's like,
but
bro.
like
Uh,
it's going to get hot down there. But
yeah,
but if point is if you're looking for sin in Israel, like, okay, well, it's
yeah,
not hard to find. I bet if we look for sin in your life, it wouldn't be hard to find.
correct,
Is God not going to
correct.
be kind to you because you maybe aren't where you think that you should be or could be, or where he desires for you to be? None of that makes any difference. The fact is that God has made a decision. This is how he's doing it. And if you're unhappy with the fact that God is prospering Israel in the land of their
Yeah,
forefathers, in the biblical heartland, and they are still proud to make Tel Aviv, the gay capital of the world, and abortion and all the whatever your offenses are, um, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just telling you, you're at odds with what the biblical prophet said would happen. Again,
yeah,
the real issue isn't Israel. The real issue is that, well, I don't know that Israel deserves it. I don't know that God should do that. Well, thank God that you're not God, because that's not how it works. He's
Yeah.
made the
Yeah.
decision, and God has made the decisions, and he's making these choices. And I'll say this as well. I mean, especially speaking to the Christian world, when we talk about love and kindness and forgiveness and long suffering, and how we know these characteristics from God. Like, how do we know that God is loving? How do we know that God is forgiving and long suffering and slow to anger, as he describes himself in Exodus? Well, isn't it because if you have a friend or a spouse who is known to be kind and loving and patient and all those things, isn't it because you've been the one pushing the button over and over and over and over and over again, and they've had lots of opportunities to get angry and throw you out the door, start a fight or whatever, but they're patient and they're long suffering and they're kind and they're forgiving. The fact is that for Christians, the reason that you even know about those characteristics of God is because of Israel.
Yeah.
Is that because Israel has remained in some aspects to be stiff-necked and hard-headed on some aspects. Yeah. God has used that to demonstrate his kindness and his loving commitment to his covenant, even when he's bringing his people back to a land and they give no thought of that the people aren't even giving him any credit for he's the one bringing them back. Now, at some point, according to the prophets, he's going to bring us all back, and then things are going to change. So the fact that he's against all historical odds, he's bringing the people back to the land is thriving, the world is changing because of Israeli ingenuity on every level across the board, really. And yet they're still not, I'm again painting with a broad brush in Israel, but still not recognizing the God of Israel for who he is and keeping those covenants. At some point, that's going to change. So God is in the process of doing this much. And according to the prophets, there's still this much that's going to be happening. I'm pretty sure that the rest is coming. And so, back to that issue of, well, who do we know what Israel is and who do we know what Israel isn't? There's a couple stories that I like to tell, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of these guys. Years ago, I was in Jerusalem, and at that time there was a small little museum shop called the Treasures of the Temple, and it's set up by the guys at the Temple Institute who are rebuilding all of the aspects for temple life for when the third temple is going to be built. And they're not building replicas; they're building things to actually be used, and they see their work as like David making preparations for Solomon to put all these pieces into place. So I was in between tour groups, and I was hearing about, at that time they had just finished the high priest breastplate, and with the jewels and the woven colors and everything down to the details and down to the descriptions. And at that time, one of the guides that were in there was talking to, and he said, let me show you something. And he pulls me over to the silver trumpets, and he says, you see these silver trumpets? They're here. He said, these are the trumpets that are going to be used. The family that made these silver trumpets is the same family that made the silver trumpets for the second temple, and is the same family who made the silver trumpets for the first temple, which we're talking about family line history going back to 3,000 years of craftsmanship just to make silver trumpets to be used in the worship of God at the temples that is described in the Bible. So when we talk about Jewish history and Jewish documentation, there are families that I'm sure some of you know as well, that their families have been rabbis for generations to generations to generations, all the way back to first century Judaism, back to when the temple was still standing. I don't know of any other people group that have such detailed, accurate genealogy from father to son, on back through the generations to document their connection to their ancestors from biblical times. Like, this is, so we're not just talking about, I took a DNA test and yes, I'm Jewish and I'm connected. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about family lines and names. And so, going back to the details. And so again, when I'm in this museum and this guy's telling me about the silver trumpets, he sees sort of that my mind is, trying to wrap my head around that. And and so
I think my family might be related to Davy Crockett. That's a few hundred years ago. He's like, oh,
so
that's good.
he sees my mind as sort of My mind is blowing at this point. He kind of leans in and he says, "Oh, and the showbread that goes on the like the actual recipe for the table of showbread that goes, every that's changed out every Shabbat. That's in the. We know the family that's kept the secret recipe since the time of the temple period, and we know this family. We know that family, so that when the time comes." This has been something that's been handed down generation to generation. So we're not talking about just random stories, and we're not saying,
Hmm.
I think Israel is this because of my theology says that. We're talking about family history, father to son to grandfather to great grandfather, great great great, going back to biblical times. And even if they don't understand it, I have again another friend in the U.S. whose last name is Levison, or Levi's son. And he's talked about, like, for generations, he's always, during the high holy days, his family always is helping in the synagogue with different, helping with the service and helping with different things. Like, that was just sort of traditionally what his family had done. And he said, I don't know why we've always done that. And I said, well, like, I'm sort of explaining it to him. And I said, well, going back to biblical times, Levi, the tribe of Levi, and Levi's son, and this man's name is Levison. According to the Torah, Levi's sons were given to the Kohanim, given to the high priest family to help serve. And I said, and he's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But my point is like, these aren't just stories, and it's not a DNA test, or it's not this, if somebody thinks that these two things would be connected. We're talking about real people passing down their family heritage, not just for a few generations, but back to biblical times. So when we
Hmm.
talk about, is Israel the real Israel? Okay. Again, rationally, if we would think about that, if Israel today is not the real Israel, like Doron, if you're not the real Israel, then God, and you're just some imposter from wherever, then God has all of these incredible historical anomalies that are surrounding this new Israel that sets them apart from all of the other nations of the world. So how do you wrap that into, like, how is that different than God saying, I'm setting you apart from the nations and I'm going to bless you to be a blessing, and you are, because of you, all of the families of the earth will be blessed. Like, if you're separating those two things, like, you've got so many holes in your bucket, like, you can't, there's nothing to carry, man. Like, there's like none
Yeah,
of this is going to make any sense at some point. Isn't it
correct.
just easier?
Like what Tucker and friends are doing, right? They're trying to plug holes in and criticize, and oh, they should do a DNA. Oh, DNA tests are forbidden in Israel. No, they're not. I
Yeah,
did a
yeah,
DNA test in Israel. So,
yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
keep peddling that propaganda nonsense that again is just another hole in your bucket, like you're saying. When you have real people, real relationship, real conversations, real interaction, like you've had, that you're just like, bro, this guy, automatically, you're like, based on the ignorant statements people make, that is not popular to hate on the Jewish people,
yeah,
automatically, oh, that's just nonsense. Just like things that people will say about the Palestinians or the Arabs here, that I get, offended for their sake. And I'm like, hey, that's not true. These are human beings we're talking about here. Like, have some respect, just the
yeah,
fact, because they have been handed this dealt this bad card, so to speak, and being used as pawns,
yeah,
to batter Israel over the head. Really, I see them not just as my the terrorists mainly, right, as my enemy, but I see them also as the victims of a world that's just hating on us and using them as the bat, you know, because it's convenient, right, for these wonderful Europeans that live far away from their
yeah,
colonial backgrounds and their white guilt or whatever you want to call it. It's like, bro, you people are deranged and you're sick, and you have zero compassion or humanity for the Arabs here or the Jews here. We're all just pawns in whatever your worldview is the bottom line. And we're talking real conversation with real people and real stories and real facts. And it doesn't compute with that crazy derangement, the Israel derangement syndrome that these people are trying to
you know,
peddle.
and I mean, again, with these are conversations I have, when I'm talking, with Christians or pastors or churches or whatever, when I'm talking about this sort of stuff, again, if I would step aside from some of the historical things we've been talking about, when Jesus is with his disciples at the Last Supper and he's talking about the new covenant, these Jewish disciples are familiar with the term new covenant, and the place where you find that, and this is easy to remember. I'm encouraging you, for anybody who's listening, if you're not familiar with it, it's easy to remember Jeremiah 31:31 that talks about the new covenant. But it says that, in those days, I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So, period. So if you are if you're a Bible believing Christian and you consider yourself a part of the new covenant, there is no new covenant aside from Israel and Judah. God is only making a new covenant with Israel and Judah, which means if you are part of a new covenant that has nothing to do with Israel and Judah, maybe you're not really part of a new covenant that the Bible talks about, because the only new covenant that the Bible talks about is made with Israel and Judah. Now, if you're not Jewish, of course you're being brought in. I mean, going back to the time of even in Exodus, God is telling his people, even before the actual Passover, if there are foreigners or Gentiles that want to eat the Passover with you, as long as they're part of the covenant, they're to be at the table. So Jews and Gentiles were always, this is not a new covenant, New Testament concept of Jews and Gentiles being together. I mean, this goes way, way back into Torah history and documentation. This has always been a thing. But when Jeremiah is talking about there's going to be a day when God is going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and then he describes what that is, the very next thing. And again, if no one's ever read this before, please take a moment and go have a look for yourself. The very next thing, as if Jeremiah wants us to, wants to make some things clear about Israel, is he says two things. If the sun and the moon and the stars stop doing their thing, if the waves stop rolling, then I will, reject Israel, as my people. There'll be a nation before me. And then he goes even further and he says, if the heavens can be searched out and the depths can be, discovered or mapped or whatever, it's then that I will reject Israel for all that they have done. So he's saying two things. They're always going to be a nation, and I'm never going to reject the people based on their behavior or the things that you do. Why? Because there's a covenant that was made. So it's almost like, that the prophet Jeremiah says, the new covenant, it's with Israel and Judah. And just so there's no confusion about Israel at any point in the future, the very next thing he talks about after talking about the new covenant is, by the way, Israel will always be a nation before me, and I will never reject them based on all that they have done. So if you are a part of a new covenant, as a Christian, as a Bible-believing Christian, and that's what you read a portion of the Bible called the new covenant, then these are things you need to wrestle with. You need to come to terms with the fact that there is no new covenant apart from Israel and Judah, and God makes clear that if you're part of the new covenant, I've never rejected, or I've never done away with my people, and I've never rejected them based on what they've done. So these are some very clear, documented things that even now we see playing out in some of the discussions we're talking about, whether in the church world or in the physical, historical, political world as well. Things that the prophets are talking about, is not just simply talking about spiritual things, although they are, but they're also talking about factual realities, because, as you well know, from a Jewish mind, a biblical mind, there's no separation between sort of your spiritual life and your physical life. Like, this is all intended to all be together. So there was no, in the Bible, there's no concept of, well, I'm going to synagogue and I'm going to the temple and then I'm going to go back to work. It was all intended to be all in one, and to be all encompassing, an aspect of life. And that's what the new covenant is really intended to be about.
Yeah. So then a good way, I think, also then to add to that, as a Christian, right, your only leg to stand on for God's promises to you can only be valid through the people of Israel that you're grafted into.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So without them, there's no promise for you. There's no assurance for you. And so really, to hate on Israel is to hate on yourself. and to hate on your foundation and to turn on yourself, basically. And isn't that the irony? Because
Yeah.
again, I'm just looking at what the New Testament says. I'm not pushing my theology here, but the
Yeah.
plain text, the plain language of Paul talking about Israel being the olive, the cultivated olive tree, and that the nations are grafted in as wild olive branches, and so on and so forth. So just take that analogy, that picture that Paul takes, right, and gives as his ministry to the nations, to the non-Jews,
Yeah.
to bring them into the house of God, right, as he calls the commonwealth. And so if all that is true, you can't have a commonwealth when Israel's rejected, when Israel's done away with, so to speak, in your
Yeah.
theology and the way that you're thinking. But I want to end on a high note here. You mentioned, I think, one or two of the seven anomalies that you have
Yeah.
been documenting and teaching on, that really, again, it just really blessed me. It was so clear, it was so good that I had to share it also on one of my podcast interviews, because I was like, you know what, you know. I'm not good, because I was like saying, like, you're like, I'm not going to argue theology with you. I'm not going to try to tell Christians what to believe. That's not my place. It's between you and
Of
God.
course.
You believe what you want to believe and what Scripture tells you. But here's some things to think about, because if what you're saying is true, which I know is not, then you're ignoring like these anomalies, these things you can't explain any other way. It's not a secular hand of man that created this.
Yeah.
And I'll add to it before you get into that. I want you to finish with that,
Mm.
like finish our conversation with that. I mean, we can finish with
Yeah.
this. But one of the things I want to weigh in on is, like you pointed out about the tech and all this. Here's something that few people have talked about, and that is the fact that the promise of God also is He'll bring you to a land of flowing with milk and honey. The honey in there is date honey, okay, like the biblical honey that we're talking about, context wise, is date honey. But when Jews came back to the land, we our agriculture was heavily influenced by actually Christian uh, end time people, right? They came from America, they came from Germany, they came from all these different places, and you know what I'm talking about, because you've been there and you've seen it, and you've
Of
seen
course.
their imprint. The German colony, the American colony, and all these colonies.
Yeah.
But they also brought tech. They brought or not tech, farming technology and techniques that are European, right? They're not Middle Eastern. So one of
Yeah.
which is producing milk production, and the other would be, like, for example, bee honey, right? It wasn't a thing in the Middle East, at least not here, where you had like a massive bee honey industry.
Yeah.
But when Jews started to tap into that and using these European style that they had learned from these Europeans that came and brought it, um, it just turns out that the milk production for the Israeli cows is higher per cow, like production of how many liters per cow can produce, than European cows, than Swiss cows. Okay.
Than any
You know,
other cow in the world.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like, I've seen Swiss cows. Okay. I've seen cows in Texas. Those are cows. We
Yeah.
have we have these measly looking things.
Yeah. I get it, man.
It's not like if you judge a book on its cover, you're like, wow, these cows. The cows don't look impressive, right? Yet the production, yeah, is just phenomenal. The other thing is that the bee production, our bees give and produce us more honey than any other bee production anywhere in Europe, like the most in the world as well, right?
Incredible.
Per output. And it's like when you're looking at these, to me, these are anomalies that I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so it's a secular nation, right? This is all junk. This is all nil. Okay. Every war we've ever fought, even though, and you'll bring out one of those points,
Yeah.
even though we had everything against us, we just happen to keep winning. We just keep happening to keep succeeding. We keep having supernatural success for less than what the world population of Jews is. Was
Two.
it 0.2% of world population, and
Correct.
only half of that live in Israel. So
That's right.
0.1% of the world population has all of these miracles and all these anomalies. So can you end with that? Because I think that's a great way for us to end We did dabble a little bit into the theology and answered, I think, respectfully, some of these questions people are raising. And really, it's
Yeah.
not questions; it's actually more accusation and kind of just being ugly and trying to discredit what God is doing. But you came up with some really awesome points, and I'd like you to educate the audience here on those.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple more points as we wrap up. I mean, just
Yeah,
you mentioned about the wars, and you would, I'm sure that you and I could talk for a couple more hours just in the miracles that you've seen, in the last 20
yeah,
years in war fighting, as a
yeah.
Israeli warrior. But there's no other people group in history that have overcome such overwhelming odds to establish a nation. What I mean by that, again, we're just talking documented facts and figures on when in 1948, when the British are pulling out, the five Arab armies are sort of salivating to come in and telling most of the Arab inhabitants, just go on a 2-week vacation. We're gonna, you'll come back and you'll get your stuff and all the Jewish stuff as well. And so, but on the day that the war starts, the I was going to even say the IDF. At that point, it wasn't even really the IDF. It was sort of the hodgepodge, Jewish pioneer farmer, defender. They're out. They're
Haganah,
out.
Irgun, whatever, and they were all divided. By the way, on top of
Yeah,
that, they were all divided.
exactly my point. Like there was no unified IDF. There were 3 or 4 of
No,
these different bands that all didn't like each other, and all of their politics were wrong, and there was a lot of infighting. But on the day that the war starts, they're outnumbered as a whole. They're outnumbered 4-1. They're outnumbered 8-1. Israel has no planes. They've got a couple, armored. I think they have 2 or 3 tanks, a couple armored vehicles, and most of the cannons that they actually own aren't even in the country yet because of the British embargo. They had purchased World War II surplus in Czechoslovakia and some other places like that from just Jewish fundraising around the world prior to 48. But on the day that the war starts, there's Shimon Peres's Shimon Peres was one of Israel's prime ministers who was a young man as an aide to David Ben Gurion, who
hmm
becomes Israel's first prime minister, and he writes in his memoirs, and this is mind blowing to me that I hadn't learned until reading his memoirs, but he talks about being in the room when one of the top generals comes in to Ben Gurion prior to 48 or prior to the War of Independence. And Ben Gurion is saying, how much ammunition do we actually have? And his response was, for the entire nation, within 3 or 4 days, we're going to run out of ammunition for like we don't even have enough ammunition. So the Jewish defenders are outnumbered 4-1. They're outgunned 8-1. They don't have enough guns for the people, and they don't have enough ammunition for the guns. There's no heavy weapons, and over
By the way,
30%. Go ahead.
a lot of the time, just to give people some concept, you had guys who had only a gun and guys that had only the ammo, and they would run with the person with the gun, and they were like the ammo carrier for the guy with the gun.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's just
Like
I
insane.
I, I interviewed, and this is a different conversation. I interviewed some of these
Yeah.
guys that were actually fighting in the war, and he was like, we were just like little band. Like we had to wait until like the last raid of guys went out to come back so we could take their guns and then go out on the next raid. Like it was just there was
Yeah.
just nothing to like. There wasn't like there was no uniforms. There's no gun. Like there's where do you even get the ammunition? Like how does this even work? And so on top of that, over 30% of the defending force are made up of new immigrants who don't speak Hebrew and have never held a weapon and are like Holocaust survivors or farmers or so. So how do you win a war when you're outgunned? You have no heavy weapons. You're running out of ammo within literally a few days, and the majority of your defending, not the majority, but a large minority of your defending force, up to 30 or even 40%, don't even speak the language of the rest of your army and have never even held a weapon. Like, how do you?
Yeah.
Like, of course, the Arabs said, "Hey, this is going to be a 2-week campaign. We'll blow everybody away, and then this will be easy."
Yeah.
It should have been easy,
Yeah.
but my point is, historically, from military history,
Yeah.
there's just no other people group who have overcome such overwhelming odds to be able to not be overrun in 2 weeks, but 8 or 9 months later, where they're actually having these ceasefire agreements and drawing lines and think how do you survive in a war for a few weeks, let alone 8 or 9 months, when your army's not an army. Like this, like none of this makes any sense. And so in Isaiah 11:11, when it talks about that God will, when he brings his people back, he's going to raise up a standard. Or sometimes a translation will say he'll raise up a banner to the nations. But the word that's sometimes translated there as standard or banner is the word nes in Hebrew, which in modern Hebrew literally means miracle. So why it's translated, I'm not a Bible translator, but from the original Hebrew, it could literally say that when he brings his people back, he will raise up a miracle for the nations. And when we're talking about just simply the factual military survival of the nation being established under these incredible, overwhelming odds, there's miracles. There's no other way to describe what that was aside from miracle. And yet the prophet Isaiah 2,600 years ago says, when I bring my people back a second time, that's where he talks about returning his people back to the land a second time. He's going to lift up a miracle to the nations. Well, we're in the time of God bringing his people back a second time, and to establish the nations, he is definitely demonstrating miracles to the nations. Now, whether the nations want to see it or not, is a whole other topic and conversation. But the fact is, he is doing things that have never been done before, and no one can explain. And so, I'm not sure exactly if it's true or not, but I've read in several sources that West Point Military Academy in the U.S., or like the military academy training in the Kremlin in Russia, like there are like these world-renowned military training centers don't study the wars of Israel because of how improbable the outcomes are. So, normally if you're outmanned, you're outgunned, you don't have any heavy weapons, and your army doesn't even speak the same language, sucks to be you, man. You're going to lose. Like there's nobody thinks that you're in good standing.
Yeah.
Unless you're the Jewish people who have these prophecies that were written 2,600 years ago. I don't know how to put those things together aside from just recognizing this is the history and this was what was prophesied. So that alone, and we could even talk about, some of the miracles that have happened in the last couple years with the war with Iran and the missiles and the Iron Dome and the planes going back and forth, and just, and what, buildings that were blown up, some of the hospitals in Israel that had just been evacuated, that was later hit with a missile that would have killed hundreds or thousands, that didn't hurt anybody because it had just been, just incredible, ridiculous stories.
I was giving blood at one of those hospitals, by the way.
You were giving blood there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my team and I, when we were deployed, we had a few hours off, and there was a request that they were saying that there was a need for blood banks, and so we rotated and from my team and basically sent guys to go give blood. And I think it was like either the day after or shortly after the hospital, like you said, got hit, but they had just evacuated that particular area. They got hit and nobody was injured.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so, and I guess this is my point, and this is just one point here, is that when we're talking about the military history surrounding the Jewish people and surrounding the establishment of the nation, and even, the miracles through the 6-Day War in 67 and 73, like no matter what major conflict that you're looking at within Israel, it is difficult to find another nation that can even come close to the military historical miracles, anomalies, things that have never happened. Like it's just that's unique in and of itself. So that's one point. A second along that line is that no other time in recorded history in any nation and other people group has a national population absorbed the immigration that doubled its size in 3 years. So in 1948, there's, depending on the estimates, about 650,000 Jews in Israel, at the founding of the state, and of pioneers that had moved in because of the well, really because the Jews are just returning home and they're hearing the news, and some are coming on boats and some are traveling across land and trains. Just incredible stories. Within 3 years, the population received over 700,000 more immigrants. So in other words, just within 3 years, the population doubled. Now, if you can kind of imagine what that's even like, this is before the internet, before the phone calls, before any what we would consider sort of modern organization and logistics and that type of thing. You have Jews literally returning from 4, 5, 6 different continents, all arriving unannounced on the shores of Israel to say, "Here I am. I'm here. Like, what do we do?" And so there were what was called immigration camps and transit camps within Israel that were set up to kind of help process people and try to figure out where do they go and what do they do, and what about like some of the diseases that are coming from other places, and are they coming? The what's coming out of Africa is different than what life was like in Europe versus Australia, New Zealand, and like how do you blend all of these people, and how do we keep everybody safe, and how do we make sure that, like, how do you even feed people like this? How? And so, the first, just historically speaking, the first 5, 6 years of Israel's existence after these miraculous victories on the battlefield, Israel for the first several years is like teetering on the brink of just humanitarian disaster. Where do you house people? Like, how do you feed people? Like, where's the food coming from to feed double your population? We don't even know who's showing up tomorrow, let alone who came today. And sometimes boats are coming, and where are they coming from? And are they going to be sick? Are they going to be healthy? Are they going to be young or old? Like, what do we do? And so just that in and of itself, again, when we're talking about just people management, and needs of people, of just basic survival things, of shelter and food and defense, and like how does this work? There's no other, in recorded history, there's no other nation in 3 years that has more than doubled its population, and not only just survived, there's just no one's ever had to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
So when the prophets talk about that God is going to bring his people back and he's going to multiply his people on the land, and we're looking at multiplications many, many times over. So even just in the last 78 years, if Israel's starting with 650,000 Jews, and now what the Jewish population, just the Jewish community alone within Israel, the Israeli population just crossed about 10 million, I think, just in this last year. Of that, there's over 6 million of that. And I don't remember the exact number, but over 6 million of that is Jewish. So when we're talking about 650,000 in 1948 to over 6 million, I mean, this is a very clear and obvious multiplication that has happened in a way that no other nation in recorded history has ever experienced. But not only has it happened in Israel on the land of the Bible, but the prophets explained that this very thing would happen.
Yeah.
And so,
and as we're speaking, by the way, there's building cranes all over Israel, and you know this because you've seen it.
Sure.
And why is that? Because it's constantly swelling. We have constant desire for housing. There's a constant housing shortage because Jews are mainly because of anti-Semitic attacks, like you pointed out, that are increasing. They are all looking to make Israel their home because it's the only place where there's a safe haven for Jews in the world, because of people like me that will fight our enemies, and we will no longer allow our people to become the punching bag of the world and being taken advantage of again. But yeah.
And as we wrap up here, I'll give you one more. I mean, these, I have a list of 7, but I mean, even just in our conversation, I mean, we could add 8 or 9 or 10. I mean, this could go really on and on.
For sure.
But to me, one of the most incredible things, and how it ties into the scriptures as well, is there's no other language in history that was considered a dead language that was later revived as a common unifying tongue for the people group, or the ancestors, or the population who originally spoke it, except for Hebrew. And so, and how that even happened is really, pretty amazing or pretty fascinating. But, sort of that whole story by a guy by the name of Eliezer ben Yehuda, of how that even began and how all of that processed. But regardless of the history, Zephaniah 3:9. Who reads the book of Zephaniah, right? Like what's actually in there? But Zephaniah 3,
Is that in the Bible?
somewhere, it's kind of stuck in the back
Like
somewhere.
Haggai, who's that guy?
Yeah. So, somewhere in Zephaniah 3:9, and again, I'd encourage you to pick it up and look at it. God says that he's going to restore to the people a pure language. Now,
Mm.
to the Jewish mind, when you hear pure language, there's a couple things it's ironic about this, because when to the Jewish people, a pure language is the language that God spoke. It's the language that God spoke at Sinai to Moses to give the Torah. Like, that's what's considered the pure language. And so Zephaniah is saying, there's going to be a time where God is going to restore the pure language, which is wild, because at the time that Zephaniah prophesied it, the language was still being spoken. So you can imagine, like, Zephaniah's, people hearing this prophet saying God's going to restore this pure language, and it's like,
Right.
like, we're speaking the pure language. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, that's. But here he's talking about he's going to restore it. Now, the amazing thing, again, when we're talking about historical numerical anomalies, if you look at the verse directly before, in Zephaniah 3:8, it is the only verse in the whole of Scripture that has every single possible Hebrew character in it, including what's in Hebrew is what's called like the five final forms of the Sofit, or whatever we call it. It's basically, for non-Hebrew speakers, it's every possible Hebrew character in the Bible or in the Hebrew language is found in the verse. One verse before God says he's going to restore a pure language. So again, when we're talking about just sort of random coincidences, there's no other Bible verse in the whole of Scripture that has every single possible Hebrew character in the Hebrew alphabet, except for the verse that comes right before God saying, I'm going to restore to the people a pure language. So again, when you're talking about just sort of these incredible historical biblical anomalies of how things, whether you call them coincidence or not, I always joke, in Hebrew, there's in biblical Hebrew and modern, there's no real word for coincidence in Hebrew, because that concept of just these two cosmic things colliding that had no connection, but somehow together, like however you describe coincidence, like that concept doesn't
Right.
exist in the Bible. Is that the idea is this, that God is in control. He said what he's going to do, and he's doing what he said he was going to do. And so throughout human history, never has there been a language that's been revived that was considered a dead language for hundreds and hundreds of years, only being used as, in Torah reading or synagogue or, in study. And why that should matter to Christians is, it's only the language that was originally spoken of, 2/3, 3/4 of your Bible. And the fact that the revival of the Hebrew language in the last 100 years has brought such depth and such revelation to understanding not only modern Hebrew, using modern Hebrew, but understanding biblical Hebrew and how the words functioned. And we're finding a lot of this through, from archaeological writings and how things have been kind of pieced together. The fact that the language is being revived as a common unifying tongue is a benefit and a blessing to every person who reads the Bible, even in translation, because the translations are getting more accurate. The translations are getting better and cleaner back to the original language. And that was something that was not just impossible, just couldn't even have been dreamed of a couple hundred years ago. So 100 years ago, Hebrew is considered a dead language, and today, millions of people got apps on their phone who are studying it. And historically, throughout human history, never before has that happened. It just happens to be the language that most of your Bible is written in, and the language of the people that God says he's made an everlasting covenant with, and the language that God says, I'm going to restore it as a pure language back to the people. And so, again, there's just the longer you get into just factual, documented, historical, verifiable evidence, you have to, and I love your term about the Israel derangement syndrome. Like, you have to intellectually and rationally just turn that part off in your brain to say, I don't like anything that Israel does or says. I'm going to believe this over here. But you have to basically stick your head in the sand and
Yeah.
ignore the world around you so that you cannot recognize the fact that, we could go on for the next couple hours talking about these historical anomalies, or the medical advancements, or the advancements in text, or the breakthrough in agricultural, and the pulling water out of the sea, and now the nation is over 50% of the water usage in Israel right now is coming from desalination plants pulling water out of the sea. I mean, this is like, who would have even dreamed of this 100 years ago? And
Yeah.
and so, like, these things continue on and on and on, and to really believe, like the Tucker Carlsons and the Candace Owens and some of these pundits who are putting this garbage out, with honor and respect on some level to their position and what they're trying to do, they're factually and evidentially just completely ignorant and blind of the fact that, okay, believe whatever you want to believe, but are you going to literally ignore the facts on the ground that I can literally take you to the hillsides? I can literally take you to the desalination plants, and we can put, a cup under the spout and beside the sea, and you can look at the sea and know that the water you're about to drink just came from right over here. Like this is verifiable evidence. And I know I keep saying this over and over, but to me, it is so incredulous that people would literally turn off the world around them to believe whatever narrative that they have in their head, while just completely shunning visual, factual evidence that's in front of you. And to me, that comes back to a spiritual aspect of, why is there an enemy who is so opposed to the things of God and the promises of God that one particular people group, 0.2% of the world's population, that the world would want to demonize, literally, this particular people group, when all of these incredible advancements and anomalies and historical, incredible stories of faith and miracles is coming out in a way that really the world has never seen before. And to me, that's what it really comes down to. Because, and I'll make this as my last statement. If you are a Christian and you believe Jesus is the Messiah and you are awaiting his return, according to the Bible, according to these same prophets, the arrival of the Messiah, and whether you think it's Jesus or not, when the Messiah arrives, Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14 says he's going to put his feet on the Mount of Olives, and he's going to enter Jerusalem to defend his people. So if you are awaiting the arrival of Jesus, your Messiah, on the Mount of Olives, and you're believing that because the prophets give you very two clear prerequisites for that to happen. Number one is that there's a Jewish Jerusalem. He's coming to defend his people. And number two, it's because all nations have gathered against Jerusalem. So for the first time in thousands of years, those are the two prerequisites. So for the first time in thousands of years, we have a very clear Jewish Jerusalem, Jewish sovereignty since 1967. And for the first time ever in history, we have nations around the world making decisions on how they feel about Jewish people living in a Jewish city on Jewish land given to them by the God of Genesis 1. So according to the prophets, what do you think is coming next? If you are awaiting for his arrival, according to the prophets and against all odds, what the prophets said were the prerequisites are already in place, and it has everything to do with Israel. And so if you're blind to that and you're jumping on to the anti-Israel, all nations against Israel, I wonder how your Messiah is going to feel when he arrives on the Mount of Olives and you're realizing that you're on the wrong side.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope for many Christians out there that are listening and have gone this far in our conversation, I hope that you prayerfully read through Scripture, read through your Bible, Genesis through Revelation, not Matthew through Revelation, but Genesis through Revelation, get the full picture of God's Word, and you'll see how there's no contradiction there between you know the Christians versus the Jews. It's I don't see that in there. I've you know again I've had the privilege of studying and learning from some top Christian leaders and theologians around the world, and converse with them and pick their brains on these issues. And it's just not in Scripture. It's in a posturing that you have, like you said, that it's a spiritual, it's really a spiritual blindness I see, and
Yeah.
and that's why I call it an Israel derangement, because it's not natural. Your criticisms are not natural. They're not normal. Um, and I tell people, like, people who want to criticize Israel, and like we were saying earlier about, we have the gay parades here, and we have abortion that's legal, and all these things. Yeah, there are negative aspects, but does America not have that? Is the president of the United States a Bible believing Christian? You know,
Yeah.
like, I don't need to answer that to you. He said it himself. Okay,
Yeah.
Trump is not a Christian. He has respect for Christians. He has respect for Jews. He has respect. He has respect, but he hasn't proclaimed himself to be either. And and you have legalized abortions, and you have gay parades, and you have all these things, right? Just like Israel's struggling with, because there's a secularization of culture that fights against the godliness and God centrality of those cultures. So if America, being the founded on Christian values, which the founding fathers, to my knowledge, they were, and that's what they were envisioning. They weren't envisioning an America where abortion would be allowed ever, and a bunch of other things, right? The not allowing to pray in schools or what have you. So you have it in your culture, you have it in your country, so I just tell pastors when they ask about, well, what about your prime minister? He's this, and what about these decisions that are made that are not godly? And ask them back. I say, is it not true for you as well? More than that, and I can tell you as an Israeli who's grown up here, there are more Jews who fear God in Israel than there are Christians who fear God in America. That's a
Absolutely.
fact.
I
And
found,
you
I
know
found
this.
that
You
as
can
well.
you can correct me, and say, "Hey, Doron, quit trying to feed people the Kool-Aid." But you come as a visitor too, and who's been here many times throughout years. Is
Yeah.
it not true that their religious Jews, God-fearing Jews, has increased within the past 20 years?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, no question. In fact, when I talk about some of these points again when I'm talking to Christians and saying, like, there are sometimes I'm finding in some of our personal friends, that are in Judea and Samaria, these are religious guys who love the God of Israel, who are choosing to live in the biblical heartland because they understand this is the time and the season. Is it dangerous? Sometimes it can be. Is it is it a bit tricky? Yes, of course it is at times. Um, but the fact is that I often will find Jewish men who would not, consider themselves believers in Yeshua or believers in Jesus, walking in more faith according to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because of what was prophesied, written in their Bible, and they realize this is the time and the season. I'm believing God that this is what I'm here for and this is what I'm doing. I find more faith in some of those Jewish communities to me than I do in some church communities as well, who are living very comfortably and are not, making any type of stand in their life based on any biblical principles. And again, that's not to throw anybody under the bus or disrespect any churches or pastors or Christians, but there is this disconnect in the Christian world that if Jews don't believe in Jesus, then they don't understand prophetic symbolism, they don't understand faith, they don't understand, putting their life on the line to walk out, in God's calling. And I've, you and I both know, I mean, we've got personal friends that are doing all of those things that would not, associate with, some of the evangelical Christian world as far as like a personal connection. But they're connecting with Christians over the fact that God is fulfilling his word and he's doing what he said. And we're here following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and recognizing some of those friendships. And so to your point, It's there's definitely been, dare I say, revival, restoration, a growing of faith, of God stirring His people. Well, I mean, like we said earlier, I mean, that's kind of what the prophets talked about. He's going to bring people back,
Hmm.
and then when they're in the land, hearts are going to change, and we're already seeing that on every level. But it's oftentimes different than what maybe Western Christians would like to see or what they would expect. But again, different culture, different land, different Bible, or a different perspective of the Bible. I mean, and
Yeah.
but the fact is that God is doing exactly what He said, and we're just trying to keep up with what did God say and what is He doing and how can I follow the God of the Bible and align my life with His and not try to make His stuff applicable to where I'm living my life.
Mm. Well, Doug, brother, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and refreshing. Especially like I said, earlier to you, I was telling you off camera how, it's just been such a wave of just Christians that have just kind of fallen by the wayside, I would say, to the criticisms of Israel. They don't know how to handle it. And therefore, nobody wants to, of course, be confrontational, like Americans are. It's like, oh, I don't want to offend anybody and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And right. And so what happens is, right, is you just get sucked into, or sucked under, I guess, or under the weight of this growing criticism and turning against the Jewish people and Israel and so on. And we need to have good conversation on this, and give people some good grounding, because really this right here, this interview is for you. If you're that one feeling like you're being drowned by the disinformation, by the hatred, and you don't know on what leg to stand on, I think Doug did a great job just giving you good facts, history, archaeology, Bible. And by the way, talking about archaeology, we mentioned Isaiah. Guess what? Just recently, the Armstrong Institute and the Israeli Archaeological Society have found, in the southern steppes there, they found in their latest dig of the Ophel, they found the Isaiah Bula
hmm
with Isaiah stamp, and his potentially his thumbprint, or someone who worked for him, right,
it's
that
incredible.
put the stamp. Can you imagine that we potentially have the finger, what's this called? Print,
The thumb,
the
yeah, the
fingerprint.
thumb,
Yeah,
yeah,
the thumbprint of the man who wrote these words that you're mentioning. These aren't fables. Like, the more I see stuff like this, the archaeology that keeps on getting uncovered, we're not talking
absolutely,
about fables, Queen of Sheba, it's in their special language that they spoke during the time of Solomon, because it's not Ethiopian text of today. Yeah. So
Mhm.
some experts, and it was like this one dude in the archaeological society who could even read it. He's, it's like, oh, where's that nerd? That guy that always geeks out on the one thing that's irrelevant. And everybody's like, who cares? This guy comes and goes, oh my gosh, this is like from the Ethiopian part of the world during the time of King Solomon,
Wow,
and this is the trade inscription of the trade between the two nations, and it's confirming that story with Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and so, like, everything comes together.
yeah,
And it's like, people like you and me are privileged to be connected to that reality, to those
yeah,
truths, and to be grounded. And like I read earlier here in Psalms chapter 2, hey, I'm not moved by your criticisms, by your hatred. I am proud in standing on God's word, in his truth, and in what he's doing right now.
yeah,
You're the one that should be ashamed. You're the one that is ignorant and is talking obscenities. And we're just trying to live our lives and to be faithful to God in this land, because
yeah,
I see it as not just a privilege, but as a responsibility, because I don't believe this is Israel's land. Based on what I read from scripture, I believe it's God's land. Like you said, It's his choosing. He chose to set this land apart for a reason and for a purpose. And part of
Absolutely.
that is for the Jewish people to be able to spread the Torah of God to the world from Zion. And here we are having this conversation, and I'm in the mountains of Zion,
Yes, you
and
are.
through tech, we're able to spread this knowledge, and I just find that to be fascinating and exciting. And I know for many of you who are listening, um, you're like, man, this is some really good truths that these guys were talking about today. Again, spread this, guys, share it. It's not going to get out by the algorithms or whatever. You have people who are challenging you with these questions, or friends of yours that are challenged by all these criticisms against Israel and hatred. Share this episode, because I think um, we did a pretty darn good job of just giving you guys some really good hard facts to give people and talking points that you can just say, well, what about this and what about this? Because they love the what about. Yeah, well, what about these
Right.
anomalies?
Yeah.
Like, Mr. Criticizer. So, Doug, you've been a blessing, brother. Thank you so much. Um, Again, like with all the guests, at the description below of this podcast is going to be Doug's website. Get his books. You see the two books back there, Israel Rising, Jerusalem Rising, and a third one of the series soon to be see the light of day. These are great books. I have all of your books, of course, and people love them when they visit our house, and we show them out. And I think at one point we were looking at one of them, and I think it was with you, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is Doug over here, and they're like, oh, really? Like, it's like, yeah, real people are making these cool books.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll add too, for those that are listening for, and we didn't talk about it at all, but since October 7th, I've led 9 different harvest aid teams that have worked with farmers on the Gaza
mm,
border and on the Syrian border. And so, coming for 10 or 14 days, not so much as a tourism group, but a group as small as 8 or 10 people that are working hands-on with Israeli farmers. I mean, we were down on the Gaza border within 4 or 5 months of October 7th. So that next spring, we're literally working, a mile or two from the border, hearing the explosions and hearing, trying to get farms back online, trying to get harvest in, trying to get, so I've led 9 of those groups personally in the last, almost coming up, 2.5 years or so. I have
yeah,
another one that's going to be November 6th to the 19th. And so we'll be working with some guys up in the Golan Heights. I haven't worked it out with you yet, Doron, but there's a good chance that if anybody's watching this or listening to this would like to get on that trip, chances are probably pretty good we're going to have Shabbat with Doron sometime along along that on that trip. But
absolutely.
that can be, if you're interested in that, please subscribe at EzraAdventures.com. That'll be on my list, and then you'll get some of the information. But the types of groups that I'm taking are not just tourism groups. It's really to get involved locally, and especially for people that are asking the types of questions about what really is going on. Is this the real thing? I mean, I think the most common comment that I heard from my last group when we had Shabbat with you and your family was, Americans saying, we don't hear any of this on the news. Like we don't get any of this information. Like we had no idea that this was, what's really happening. And of course you're, sharing your firsthand accounts, not only from war fighting, but, just practically and what's happening in the country. And that's really my goal with these groups, is to connect especially Western Christians, Western believers, with the facts on the ground of real relationships, what life is really like in Israel, the struggles, the joys, the personal interaction of conversation over a Shabbat table, and those are times that are really special. So that'll be coming up in November. That's my next group, and if anybody's listening and wants to join, please sign up at the website, and we get you the information on that, and you can jump on board. But we'll plan for like a week of work, morning till evening, working alongside Israeli farmers to help, still to help some of these farms recover from a massacre 2.5 years ago. Like there's still significant need within the agricultural community of just hands to help with harvests, just to bring fresh fruits and vegetables to market for Christians, Jews, Druze, Muslims, Arabs, anybody. Everybody loves fresh fruit and vegetables. So it's a great way to get involved locally, helping a real practical need on the ground, and of course connect with everybody who's living in Israel. And it's it's opposite of what the Instagram reels are showing.
Exactly. And just so you all know, the reason why Doug is helping in this area, and it is an actual need, is because the guys that are usually working these fields have been deployed nonstop with, I mean, we're still being deployed, by the way. There's ceasefire or whatever, but we still have to defend the border, what's known as the yellow line in Gaza, the push that the IDF has made up in Lebanon, pushing back and taking over Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. This is wearing our military thin and wearing our society. And so all parts of society have been impacted, including agriculture and fields and you've seen it with your groups, where there's just an overwhelming amount of fruit that's, if it's not going to be harvested, it's just going to fall to the ground and die.
Exactly.
And it's a shame. And so that's a wonderful way to put your hand to the land in a very impactful and wonderful way. That has nothing to do with conflict, nothing to do with supporting the Zionist regime, like crazy people out there that it's really, you don't care about feeding, like you said, because people are disconnected. Who do you think that these people are feeding? They're feeding Druze, they're feeding Bedouins, they're feeding Christians. Israel isn't this crazy whatever that these Instagram or news agencies are reporting. It's a real place with real people in a very multi-ethnic and religious culture. These Jewish farms, mainly led by Jews, produce for the masses of Israeli society, which is all of that. So if you have a problem with that, then you can take your social justice warring and take it somewhere else, because you have no clue what you're talking about. But in any case, thank you guys again for listening this far. This has definitely been a deep dive, and you'll have all the links. Click, follow, subscribe. Doug has a newsletter as well where he keeps you updated. And if he's having a seminar, like I got the privilege of joining, definitely sign up to that if it's anywhere local where you'll be. I'm telling you, it is impactful and life-changing, really. And you'll walk away feeling grounded, feeling empowered with truth, and not just propaganda nonsense like you're hearing all around. Doug, brother, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. God bless you, and shalom from Israel.